Welcome, everyone. We're happy as always that you were able to join us for HAI at Work today, wherever you might be around the world. We routinely have visitors from quite a number of countries. In today's topic, we're going to discuss drones or remotely piloted vehicles and the role they can play in an existing helicopter business. But first, as always, I'd like to introduce our speakers who will join us today. First of all, as always, is James Viola, our President and CEO of HAI. Then we have Jonathan Daniels, who will lead off the discussion. He's got an impressive list of titles: Director of Strategy for New Air, CEO of Praxis Aerospace Concepts. He's also a founder of that company. He's a member of the HAI Unmanned Aircraft Systems Working Group. He's a member of the Unmanned Aircraft Safety, can't see the whole title. Apologize. He's a member of the ASTM International, which, if I recall correctly, is what used to be the American Society for Testing and Materials. And he's a voting member of the 2017 FAA Aviation Rulemaking Committee on UAS ID rules. Next, we have Craig Stenberg, who is the Remote Sensing and UAS Program Manager for Southern California Edison, the Aircraft Division. And we have Romin Dasmalchi, who is the Senior Director, Business Development for Government Air Vehicles for Kaman Aerospace. As always, we encourage you to ask questions. That's one of the things that really helps us out here. Last week, we actually went long because we had so many great questions, and so we encourage you to do so. To ask questions, there is a module on the side of the control screen that you have with GoToWebinar. Type in your question, and those will be passed over to me on a different computer, and we will ask or answer all those questions at the end of the presentations today. Tomorrow, most likely, you will also receive a link to a video of today's broadcast. So if you do miss something, you will be able to go back and review it tomorrow. Sometimes it happens a little bit faster, but sometimes it takes longer just right now because there are so many people doing webinars. Now with that, I'd like to introduce James Viola, President and CEO of HAI.
Thanks, Dan. Certainly, you did a great job with the intros. I know we're going to have some outstanding topics presented today, and I appreciate everybody showing up at these webinars. Not only today's webinars, but the ones we've had so far. This is our 8th webinar, and what we're trying to do is try to provide industry the information they need to be successful as we come out of this pandemic. So we've had over 1,000 viewers that have joined up on these webinars, and they've been from over 25 different countries. So if there's an international flavor out there, we'd really like you to tell us about that when you get an opportunity when the webinar is over. So today's webinar is going to talk about the integration of UAS into existing helicopter businesses. We know it's been going on out there for years now. We want to look at the opportunities out there. As I've said, if you're at Heli Expo this year, you know, this industry, the helicopter community, has owned a lot of those missions out there, and as different vehicles come on that can help us with this mission, we should be the ones that are helping excel in those areas, and UAS is one of those. So you're going to hear from some great professionals today, and with that, I'd like to go ahead and kick this off and get started with Jonathan Daniels.
Great, thanks, Jim. And you know, as one Army helicopter pilot to another, always appreciate the lead-in. All right, I do definitely appreciate the lead-in, and move forward. We've got some great speakers today. I think one of the greatest things about that, this UAS integration into helicopter business, is the fact that everyone out there has been doing business as they're supposed to, and whether it's a 133 or 135 or even the Part 91 operations, that is where that strength is. And this is just like bringing another modern airframe in. It just might be a little smaller and with less people on board. I believe we have up first is Romin from Kaman Aerospace to talk through. Oh, sorry, Craig. I apologize. Is Craig up front and to talk through this amazing program that he has.
Well, thank you, John. I appreciate that. So yeah, what I was going to talk to everybody about is what we call the model manager structure. And what that actually is about is the how do you bring UAS into your organization and do this in a way that other members of your organization can participate? And this is, so if you look at Southern California Edison, we have an aircraft operations department, and for 60 years, all the aircraft operations have been done by that one department. But now we're moving into a space where UAS has offered the opportunity that people who are not part of aircraft operations can actually move out and do some aircraft operations of their own on a small scale that would benefit what they need on a day-to-day basis. So a great example would be if we have a troubleman out there who has a question about what might be happening on their circuit in a neighborhood, where before they would have had to have either gone out and climbed up several poles to figure out where the problem is, or if the poles are not accessible, maybe go and wait for a helicopter to come and pick them up and take care of these things. Now they could go out with a small piece of equipment that they carry with them in their truck and take care of the problem within minutes. And so how do you do this in a way that ensures that everybody in your organization is compliant with regulations, and you have a standardized training, you have standardized operating procedure and everything else? Well, what the model manager structure allows you to do, and this is, as you see on my slide, this has been used by the Navy, and it's I'm a former sailor myself. What this does is allows a relatively small group of people to manage a larger number of different operations that are going on within your community. So as you see in the spoke and wheel concept here, and in a utility, you may have a transmission department, distribution department, you may have physical security, corporate real estate, GIS. You have all these different entities that would have an interest in using unmanned aircraft and can expand the value that they add to the company through this way of doing this. So what this does is with that one centralized unit, we can control the training and ensure that they're following our standard operating procedures, our safety management system, and everything else. Let me see if I can advance here. There we go. And govern across the enterprise in that way. So this way, we have one set of rules that everybody follows, and then each one of these organizations then would have a member that is also reporting back to us, kind of a liaison. And now every so often we'll go out and audit these different organizations and ensure that they're doing things the way they're supposed to be doing them. By doing it this way, we're able to maintain these standards that are happening across the enterprise. We're able to also maintain the aircraft themselves. Some of the very light maintenance, things like maybe changing the propeller blades or something like that, is something the individual operators can do. But some of the more robust maintenance, like getting inside and actually doing our annual checks of the systems and everything else, they can bring them back to us. We now give them another aircraft to continue working. We do the maintenance on that aircraft that they brought, put it back in the pool, and it goes out to somebody else who turns in theirs for repair. So again, with a relatively small number of people, we're able to maintain a larger fleet and also maintain these various standards that we want people to follow. Now, you notice what I'm saying is we're talking about the standards we want them to follow, but in other words, it's more about the things that we don't want you to do. For instance, maybe beyond visual line of sight is something we would maintain for much more advanced operators that may originate from this model manager group, or we would authorize other individuals who then be added to the waiver, which we're still working on, by the way. But they'd be added to the waiver and then be allowed to do that afterwards. But doing it this way, we're again keeping control of how things are managed or how things are operated. What we're not doing is telling them what how to do their jobs. Every single one of these different organizations is going to have a different way to operate, a different way to fly, different value that they're trying to gain out of their aircraft. And all the innovation in this wonderful new field is going to be happening from those different operators. So rather than us trying to regulate everything they're doing, you have to allow the program room to expand. You notice I also mentioned contract UAS providers. We have a three-tiered process. We have the internal stuff that's happening within that model manager, the advanced stuff. We have 85 to 90% of our operation is the goal for what we're going to be doing outside of that operation. And then there's the one-off pieces or the things that are responding to, is that me or someone else? Okay, so maybe the one-offs that we're having would be the the services that are not would not provide us a return on investment to develop. Then we're going to bring contract operators in, or maybe we have a very large-scale event and we just need to be able to flood the area with operations and pull in that much data to do damage assessment, what have you. We are in Southern California. We are subject to earthquakes. We are subject to wildfire, things like that. So that's the time where maybe we're going to bring in contractors to kind of expand the pool. But for the most part, we expect everything to be able to handle inside, within house, and on our program where we can manage everything. So let's see if I can move to the next slide here. Not moving for me. There we go. So we're talking about standardizing the aircraft, and that gets back to that model manager piece, where you want everybody in your model manager group to be experts in all the aircraft, but you don't want to have so many aircraft out there that nobody can be an expert in all of them. So we use what we call the Southwest model. And if you've flown any place on Southwest, you realize that they fly everything they fly is a 737. And they do it that way to keep their costs under control and to control the number of parts you need to purchase, the way that how many pilots you need to train and how they train them. And by keeping it to one airframe, they've greatly simplified these operations. Well, that works well for Southwest, but in the UAS world, you're going to find that you don't have one size fits all. You're going to have, see in the picture there, we see a few multi-rotors, we see one that's more like a small helicopter, we see some fixed wing. These are all going to have different ways in which they gather data, different ways in which they do their mission. So each person is going to have to solve their aircraft problem by determining what is it that they need. What kind of data do they need? That's going to drive the way that they fly the aircraft and the different aircraft that they use. It'll drive the sensors that they're flying and that sort of thing. So the idea is to pare that down to as few airframes as possible to meet all these needs, which is a little bit of an art more than a science. But by doing that, that also helps with the training and the maintenance side of it and really simplifies your program. So yeah, I'm trying to move to the next frame here. So that gets us to how do you manage all these things? And I see there's some, I have other text on the screen. There we go. So one, you have a maintenance log that you're able to keep track of all your different aircraft, the different maintenance you've done on those. You probably also are going to have an operator's log someplace to keep track of what your operators are doing. That's how you figure out or keep track of who's current on their certificates, who's current on their operation, what different level of operations can they do. Is all going to be kept in there. And now when you get to the point where your maintenance log is becoming very large, if you have more than about a dozen aircraft, you're going to want to get away from the spreadsheet. And that's why I have different logos on there. I'm not really, I'm not promoting any one of these. I'm just saying that these are different companies I know do maintenance and fleet management type software. These are ways you can keep track of a large fleet without having to maintain a spreadsheet so much. So with that software, you can manage the fleet, manage your operators, manage your airspace in many cases, manage your waivers. I would highly recommend, if you're going to have a large organization, looking at somebody's software to help you manage these things. So that's, in a nutshell, that's pretty much the way that the model manager system works. It's just it's a great way to really expand the capabilities of your organization while doing it safely and compliantly. And that's all I have. And with that, I'll turn it back over. Thank you, John.
Oh,
Thank you, Craig.
if we can have Romin go ahead and begin your presentation.
Okay, well, great. Hey, thank you very much. Really pleasure to be here with everyone today. What I thought I'd talk about is give you a heads up as to what Kaman Aerospace is up to in the UAS world here for helicopters. I'll just tell you, the bottom line here is we at Kaman, we see this as very much an evolutionary step, for what you helicopter operators do on a daily basis. Let me see here. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit lagged here. There we go. So I'll just continue on. Craig said something about, operators you're all doing different things. This is one example I put up here. Of course, KMAX is doing everything in this picture. But this is sort of a humanitarian assistance scenario, if you will. So you can see there's a lot of different missions that you do in a manned configuration. So the question is, how can you do more of that? How can we increase your capability, your capacity to do these things? Well, we think when we deliver an unmanned system, you're going to be able to do these things in bad weather. You're going to be able to do them beyond the hours that you could normally operate. The easy thing to talk about with KMAX is firefighting. How many hours a day can you firefight with a KMAX or any other helicopter? We want you to be able to fight into the night. And I know there are operators out there, Heli Express, for example. I know you're fighting fires at night on night vision goggles. We think we can offer you the ability to do this at night in an unmanned configuration so you can mitigate some risk, but just as importantly, attack that mission at times when you generally have been unable to do so. So as we have been developing this commercial unmanned system for our KMAX fleet, we are advancing with some experimentation for military applications as well. So if you think about, the changing nature of how the Marines in this case want to do logistics, there's going to be an increased threat. They're going to need to do several operations that, look at the picture here. What if you can't land these Beechcraft, for example? What if you need to use commercial shipping to help augment your military shipping? What if you need to move other robots among the battlefield to these different locations that are not connected by infrastructure? So these are all the kinds of problems, that we can solve, we can help with the unmanned application. So I'm happy to say, we're moving forward with some experimentation in this area as well. And I'll get to some more details here about the unmanned system itself. So here's a snapshot of the system at work, if you will. So for a CONOPS, whether you're talking about firefighting or oil and gas industry, if you're making multiple, long runs out into the Gulf, for example. I mean, you could do that with a manned aircraft. You do it now. But what if you could do this in an unmanned configuration? What if you could do this at night to do some of that mundane work that you could relieve, from your pilots? There's medical implications here, and you can see, you've all seen KMAX doing the heavy lifting for firefighting, but you can see power lines, power restoration, that sort of work as well. We want to take you to the next level. So some basic capabilities we're talking about: line of sight, command and control, beyond visual line of sight, command and control. You will have the ability to do dynamic retasking. In other words, your mission is going to go autonomously. You will do your pre-flight planning. Your aircraft is going to go out and execute. If you need to make a change, if you need to go to a different location, that software is available, to make those on-the-fly adjustments and that sort of thing. So just those are the basic capabilities we're offering. I'll get into some more specifics here about the unmanned. First, for those of you that are not that familiar with the KMAX air vehicle, just a couple of a couple of items here that we need to review. You've got to choose the air vehicle. We choose, obviously KMAX, but we think it's special for a few reasons. It was designed for one mission really, and that's repetitive vertical lift. We're good at it due to the intermission rotor design. You've got a very special cargo hook system, and I've got some slides here in a minute to break that out for you. And then you've got servo flat control, which is one of Charlie Command's patents that really helps reduce the weight and is a real reason behind the simplicity of operation, which means better readiness, which can't be overstated. We have a fleet, flight hours over 370,000 now, and we're running over 98% availability, and that's really sort of unheard of. I come from a military background, like many of you. Those are incredible numbers. That's why we love this as an air vehicle for an unmanned system. Continuing on with KMAX here, there's a comparison slide here, and this is not to say, we're not comparing ourselves, better or worse than anybody else, but just to drive the point home about simplicity and design and the beauty of simplicity. Really, there's three major systems here on this helicopter. Again, designed to do one thing and do one thing very well, and then you have other helicopters listed here. They're multi-mission though. They do many other things. But it adds up, and it causes there's a tax and maintenance and manpower and things like that. So again, we want to offer you an unmanned system that you can either get to the job site and get to work right away. You need to be able to afford to operate this thing, and we understand that helicopters generally can be difficult, in terms of maintenance and manpower. The apologies here, I'm doing some shifting around on my small screen here so I can see everything. In the manpower footprint, we think one pilot, one mechanic, and one operator is really your minimum crew. So if you think about that, that's pretty important. I come from a military background. We had departments that took care of aircraft, not people, not individual people. So we think that's definitely to our advantage here, to your advantage. Okay, when we start talking about getting to the job site and going to work, one thing that we don't talk about this a lot, but when you think about humanitarian assistance, or you think about trying to operate in close proximity to people on the ground or ground personnel, noise is important. Here's an acoustic comparison. KMAX is on the left there, and then another helicopter in our class with a tail rotor is on the right. And you can see there's a big difference there. The 82 decibel number, I got to tell you, I got a dishwasher that's acting up. It's about the same. It's not very loud. There's some really good information on helicopter noise level. HAI put together a good study. I reviewed that recently. But the bottom line is you get less disruption. You get safer noise levels for first responders, and for the military folks, there's a tactical advantage to not making too much noise. We like the rotor downwash of the KMAX. If you're lifting 6,000 pounds externally, most heavy lift machines are going to generate quite a vortex underneath the aircraft. I show you a picture there of one of our operators. The guy is directly underneath the helicopter, and he's quite comfortable there. I've been under there myself when there's a hovering aircraft. It's not the event that most people think when you're underneath a machine that can really generate that much lift, that much power. It's a flying truck, so you can eliminate a lot of needs for cranes, forklifts, trucks, that sort of thing. This machine has no tail rotor. Obviously there's horror stories about tail rotors, and of course they're necessary components on many helicopters. But in this case, if you want to get really down low and be around people that really don't know much about helicopters, this is a safer approach. And of course, there's the noise piece as well. And then a simpler machine, fewer POLs and things like that, so we have less environmental impact in that regard as well. So let me just shift to the UAS, and then I'm almost to get off the stage here. So I'm looking forward to your questions. Command's been doing this for a very long time. We were having a discussion earlier about, Charlie Command envisioned flying unmanned helicopters in the 50s. There's a great video on YouTube, and I'm going to make that link available. There's a link now. It's got some issues with it. We've got a good link for you, but in 1957, he flew the first unmanned helicopter, and he did it with some panache too. You just got to watch this video, and you'll understand what I'm saying. But in his mind already, he had decided that this was going to be an evolutionary thing for rotor wing aircraft. And in fact, over the years, Kaman has been highly involved with the military in developing different types of unmanned systems. There was the Burrow program in the 90s, things like that, where we were doing, automated unmanned retrograde and things like that. And of course, I think most of you would be familiar with the experiment in Afghanistan that lasted 33 months. In that configuration, that was supposed to be a short duration experiment funded by the Office of Naval Research. Lockheed Martin and Kaman teamed up on that one. And by the end of it, 4.5 million pounds of cargo were delivered in combat almost exclusively at night. And they really displaced about the equivalent of 900 convoy vehicles for you folks that remember either being there or watching the news. IADs were pretty devastating. And when you get, there are several models out there, but the bottom line is, the unmanned KMAX saved lives, and not just a few. If you think about the fact you took 900 convoy vehicles off of those roads, that's incredible. And I'm proud to say that, Kaman was part of that team. And there's a lot of operators out there. Swanson Group Aviation had guys that were working on that project as well. So what are we doing now? We're going forward with confidence. This is an evolutionary thing. This is a way for us to give you more capability out there with your KMAX. We're leveraging commercial off-the-shelf technology. It just makes a lot of sense. There's components that have already been flying out there for a long time. Why would we not capitalize on that? It saves money, it saves weight, and you get better reliability and redundancy. So the bottom line here, we're going to provide a flexible and well-supported heavy-duty UAS. It'll be optionally piloted, so you can take it across country, get to the job site, convert and do what you have to do. We're going to provide technical support. We're going to provide training for this UAS, and then, of course, spares and sustainment. And then you'll have, we'll have future upgrades, as this industry continues to evolve into the unmanned world. Okay, I skipped that slide unintentionally. We won't go back. The bottom line is an overview, right? So this is the area management slide. You can see the nose section it'll house, your avionics air data system. Center section is where most of your actuators will be for the flight controls. Unique to the KMAX, you'll have this trolley area, and then the aft rack where a lot more of your avionics, and then your antenna section. So we can break each of these down just a little bit. One theme you're going to see throughout here is redundancy by design. It just has to be that way. So you've got dual air data computers. You can see the multi-hook relay box, which is sort of unique to KMAX. A lot of people think, oh, you can do an extra load, go drop it off. Well, you can actually drop up to 4 with our current system, and there's actually designs out there that I've seen. People are looking at being able to make additional drops, so you get better capability out of the airplane. Cockpit area, there are cameras included in this first release kit. You've got a first-person view. You've got a portable maintenance computer. Cockpit view as a backup for the information that's going to be sent to the ground control station. And then you've got a sling load camera underneath so that you'll always have eyes on your external load. Here's a look under the floorboard. The nose of the aircraft is sort of at the bottom left here. Again, redundant actuators for your flight controls. Here's the trolley section. You can see the load camera placed forward of the trolley. That's our 6,000 pound capacity hook there, mounted on a trolley, which sort of allows that external load to swing laterally underneath the helicopter. That helps with a few things, namely it really maximizes all that thrust and power so that you don't waste any of that lift. But it also helps the pilot, maintain control of that load underneath the aircraft as well. And then there's a load angle sensor, which will be providing that feedback to your ground control operator as well. okay, so now we're moving towards the back of the aircraft. This is the aft equipment rack. I talked about the Afghanistan experiment. So this is a very similar configuration. So we're trying to maximize on what we learned so that we can, save costs and make sure we get good reliability in a suitable system going forward. Again, you'll see redundancy built in here. You've got your transceiver, receiver transmitters, mission computers, flight control computers will go here. Your line of sight is in here as well, along with the rad out down there at the bottom. Antennas will be located on numerous places on the aircraft. The GPS antennas. These are mounted above the main landing gear. Just a little bit about the cameras. There's a representative first-person view. The camera will actually mount. I'm not sure if you can pick up on my mouse, but right on the front right part of the dashboard, looking forward, and then you'll have a gauge view as well. So the big question, when? When is this going to happen? Well, here's your program schedule. I'm happy to say, we're moving along nicely, even with this, unprecedented pandemic response. But I'll tell you, we're very pleased at this point. What you don't see on here is when they're available. It's 2021. So that's our target date. Our launch customers are out there. We've got 5 systems already spoken for. So we're moving along nicely. In fact, later in June, we should start the install of these components and getting ready for ground, and then end of flight test later this year. A couple of slides here just to kind of show you what it might look like for those of you that were UAS operators. It probably looks familiar. Graphic user interface. This is sort of representative of what the air vehicle management page might look like. You got your map display, you got your primary flight display, and some other tailorable items on there. Show you another snapshot here, just for situational awareness. That smaller box on the right is supposed to represent your down-looking payload camera. And you could certainly have your first-person view camera up or any of the other cameras on the aircraft. Another view, so this is the idea here, is to show you could do a little more precision work from the ground control station. Again, that camera on the right is, if you give it a chance, it'll make sense. But you're basically looking down, and you can see the side of a building there, the light gray, and then the darker black area would be the ground. So side of the building into the earth there. Trying to show you where you'd be able to see the load underneath the aircraft. Okay, so that was pretty fast and furious. We didn't have a lot of time today. I really look forward to your questions here. Again, this is kind of my get off the stage moment here. I do want to share. I'm sorry, I did have one slide left. There you go. I think Dan started to take control back. Sorry about that. I spoke too soon. So bottom line is this: it's an evolutionary advancement from our perspective. We're going to deliver an increased capability, and we're going to make you more capable out there when you go do your operations. We're pairing demonstrated reliability in the air vehicle with affordable COTS technology, optionally piloted airplane, and it's a fully supported product. And with that, Dan, I'll turn it back over. I really appreciate everybody's attention. I look forward to your questions.
I think you're still muted.
And we can't hear you.
Yeah, I'm not sure anyone can hear you.
Oops, I apologize. You have my microphone off. Before I get started on the questions, I do want to just remind people that HAI does not endorse any technology or products. We are simply bringing these webinars to you with information so that you can gather information, so that it gives you an idea of what you might do with your businesses. But again, we do not endorse any product or particular technology. With that, we do have questions. I'd like to invite our panelists to come back online, bring your cameras back up, and we'll get started on some of the questions. Let's see. First one, for Craig, does the model manager system incorporate flight data monitoring?
Yeah, if you get the software for that, it certainly would. It's kind of a feature that would be built into that, but you definitely should look at that if it's available.
Okay, thank you. That question was from Rick Newson. Next one is from Benjamin Weiner. Is the UAS system for the KMAX developed in-house, or are you working with a third party for that?
So both. So yeah, we're working with a third party that works for Kaman on this project.
Okay. How mature is the KMAX with the FAA and other international authorities with regards to integration within a complex compliance matrix and with manned aviation? That's from Nick Sharp. I may have stumbled. Do you want me to read that again?
No, I think I got it. Thanks. I think that's a great question. It's the same. Yeah, I mean, I think it's the same for anybody that's bringing UAS into the market. So I'll tell you, here's what we've done. We've had our discussions with the UAS integration cell. We're a helicopter OEM, so we're talking to our local FAA reps. We're moving forward with confidence. I mean, we've done this before. We've done it safely. But like everybody else, let me just add. Well, I'll just add one more thought here. There's really a couple of different issues the way I see it. One of them is the national airspace, which everybody, this is something we all are working towards with the roadmap and everything else. The other part is, actually getting a certification on the airplane. So that's the part where I say, we go forward with confidence. We have a lot of experience in unmanning our helicopter. But yeah, there is a process here, but we're confident. I briefed the program schedule. We believe we're going to meet all those milestones on our program, and also in coordination or in concert with the FAA to make sure that our product is ready to go when we hit the market in 21.
Okay, our next question is from Greg Baker. What is the qualified pilot and mechanic pool like to crew these aircraft? Any stats or trends would be appreciated.
That's a great one. If you don't mind me starting, Craig and Romin, while you're following it behind. So there's a lot of really good things out there, and this is part of the great advantage that helicopter companies have, is that you have an existing understanding of the maintenance, you have an existing understanding of safety and understanding of crew operations as a whole to build off of. If you looked at both of our presenters, they went from the Part 107 smaller than 55 pound side all the way up to the 12,000 pound KMAX. And there's very different requirements for both of those. Part 107 is very easy to get a hold of. If you already have a pilot certificate, you can go online and get your remote pilot certificate and have it by the afternoon through IACRA, and now you're able to fly those smaller than 55 pound systems. Additionally, if you're looking at over 55 pounds, it ends up being under Part 91, and you have to have that Part 61 certificate that we all know and love and hold dear. So on the piloting side, it's there. The same thing applies to the maintenance. The challenge right there is, as of today, there are no type certified unmanned aircraft. Right? There's some special certs that are out there. There's some restricted categories, but we don't have a true type cert. And I think one of the great advantages about having Romin present about Kaman is that when you start with type certificate processes and then unman them, it's a much easier process for the FAA to understand. They get it, and they see that, and that's kind of where we see a lot of large systems coming in. On the smaller side, because a lot of that is a different world, right? It's the world of the Best Buys, the big box stores, and the tech guys coming in. We haven't quite solved that one yet, and that's a challenge for integration. I will say before I hand it off that there are 40 applicants going through type certification right now with the FAA, with the expectation that in the next few months we'll see them in the Federal Register, and we'll start seeing those type certificates for less than 55 pounds by the end of the year. And that's going to mean a lot for all of us who are trying to do this professionally. because those type certs will come with additional traditional requirements and things we're used to go for. Roman, Craig, you would.
I appreciate that. Yeah, from my perspective, I mean, that pretty much, I mean, I would have nothing to add. Thanks.
Yeah, that is one of the things for beyond visual line of sight is, especially in the utility industry, there's a group of different, of all the utilities that, we have a UAS working group that we've kind of stood up, and going for a type certification to go towards beyond visual line of sight has kind of been a big deal. So that's probably one of the resonating features you're going to hear throughout the year.
I will say that that question kind of leads into one that we've been talking about internally. Does it seem like existing helicopter operators have an easier time obtaining regulator approval and exemptions, et cetera?
I would say yes, mainly from a standpoint. There's a number of different kinds of approvals and waivers that you can get for a Part 107 operation. So my background is I actually came from a Part 61 certification process. I'm actually a commercial pilot, fixed wing. Sorry, I know it's a HAI event, but so when it came to things like needing to get what's called a special government interest waiver, which is a way that you can get into flight situations where you'd normally be prevented from regulatory reasons, but there's a public benefit or public good you're doing that. And in our case, it was to get inside of a TFR in order to look at some damage done from a fire. The fact that the application was from a Part 61 certified pilot, the FAA was much more comfortable with that kind of a waiver. So, so it does definitely pave the road for many things. And I think manned aircraft pilots and manned aircraft organizations already understand how to speak FAA. They already understand the roadmap to get to the things they need to get to. Where strictly a Part 107 operator who stood that way from the ground up actually has quite a bit more of an uphill battle there.
And I think that's really definitely one of our advantages, because everything outside Part 107 is under Part 91. Therefore, the Part 61 requirements start to apply. So right now, there's a method where you can fly greater than 55 pounds, but you have to have a Part 61 certificate, and that's all our traditional pilots. And that's, again, that's the piece there. Definitely, if you look at the 135s that have been awarded for UAS, the company that started as a 135 got theirs first, and the companies that are trying to build it from scratch have not completed the process. And that's the way it is. If we look at 137, we look at 133. Again, the companies that started out as a 133 then added a UAS platform to that, and they were able to get their certification. So you're starting from a position of strength and understanding. One thing we'll hear from the FAA is it is so important to build competence and understand the competence of the operator, and that's something we all bring to the game.
Okay, this is from Frank King. Will the FAA allow you to fly wherever you want to unmanned? We understand there are some restrictions to fly around certain areas in the national airspace. Can you describe briefly where unmanned aircraft systems can fly?
Well, I can say it's not just the FAA that you need to worry about when it comes to unmanned. Unlike your Part 61 type of operation, Part 91, 135, what have you, the FAA has absolute jurisdiction over the airspace in those cases. They ceded a lot of that jurisdiction to the local governing authorities when it came to Part 107, which is kind of unfortunate, but it is where we're at. So if you're a Part 61 pilot, you only need to really learn one set of regulations. If you're a Part 107 pilot, you gotta know the federal regulations, the local regulations, the laws, rules, all these different things, the ordinances, all that. So there's that piece of it. There's also, when you get into the out into the wilderness, you'd think it'd be the easiest place to go and fly an unmanned aircraft. Now you have the national park systems, you have the wilderness areas and the different places where the FAA doesn't really govern it, but the Department of the Interior does, the Bureau of Land Management, the Forest Service, all these different places where it's actually forbidden to fly unmanned aircraft. So you may not be violating a federal aviation regulation, but you may be violating somebody else's.
And just to throw that, a lot of that, sorry, just to build on that again, a lot of that is tied to the lack of type certification. And not to try to put all the eggs in that one basket, but those restrictions are expected to be lightened once we have a type certified process. Because as it sits right now for 107, under 107.1 as long as the remote pilot in command says good to fly, it is good to fly. And that's about the level of rigor that goes to it. Once we have type certified after 2117B, then we know that the FAA had a role in it. We have the QA, we have the production assurances, we have all the things that we're used to on a traditional aviation side. And that's why a lot of us are really excited, myself included, come fall, knock on wood, when the first type certifications roll off the assembly line.
Okay, we have a question from James Lineman, and this is for anybody. We understand that Department of Homeland Security and DoD are operating large UAS in underprotected airspace in the U.S. Are there any other large civil UAS or remotely piloted aircraft in certification pipeline like the KMAX?
So I know of a bunch, actually, and I'll leave that one there. That is the second piece to that. I guess that's a loaded question. Is define large.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I have also heard of other aircraft. I think you can find things on a number of OEM websites that will help address that as well. Actually, I think this one's going to be one for me. Will HAI be incorporating any more products, manufacturers, and related products of remotely piloted aircraft systems into future Heli Expos? And that's from Federico. He's been a past participant and past questioner for our webinars. We welcome you back, Federico. Yes, by all means. We consider the unmanned aircraft system, the remotely piloted aircraft, anything that is a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft to be part of our industry, and we welcome those aircraft and those manufacturers, those suppliers, those repair services, training partners to attend Heli Expo and share their experiences, share their products, share their knowledge. We really expect that could be a big portion of our trade show in the future, and we welcome all of those operators. This one is for, let's see, I guess it's open. From Jay Heffernan. Can anyone speak to the status of sense and avoid technology?
I know there's a number of commercial. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please, I'll follow you, Craig.
Okay. I know there are a number of commercial applications out there trying to attack this. There's kind of some innovative ideas. They all, of course, have their technical drawbacks. I can tell you that the FAA kind of shot the industry in the foot a little bit by saying they don't want ADS-B out to be incorporated into USV or UAS aircraft. And I understand why. It's because by doing so, it just saturates their system and they wouldn't be able to keep up with it. But so the technology that's there that would make the most sense is kept away from the Part 107 operations. There's some sonic detect and avoid potentially useful technologies that are in development. There's some optical ones. And if you know of anything else, John or Doan or Roman, please step in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to jump on. Oh, go ahead, Roman.
Oh, just a quick thought here. So you know, I mentioned the military experimentation we're doing. You know, we're experimenting with sensor-based autonomy and some you know, radar-based type sense and avoid technology as well. I think there's a lot of it. I don't think it's, you know, off the shelf. You know, just grab one and plug it in just yet. Hopefully it'll get there. I'd like the option to choose from whichever one command would like to incorporate in future iterations here. But there is a lot of work being done in that area, and I know that the military guys are very interested in this for their next generation of unmanned.
Right. So the FAA just recently awarded a couple of different contracts to help support that. One of them was the UAS Traffic Management Pilot Program Round 2 for New York and Virginia, and there's some broad area announcements that have tied into that as well. So we're really looking heavily at that. I say that it's one of the things that I'm involved in with New Air, and that part of that thing is that right now we're still looking at the ground-based sensitive avoid versus and detect and avoid versus airborne detect and avoid, and making sure all that together works out well. And how do I say it properly? I thoroughly agree with Craig. 15 years ago when we were looking at ADS-B implementation and went, wow, this would be so easy for UAS. A lot of us were caught off guard when a few years back that changed completely. And that's one of those things that as we move forward with remote identification, that's going to become part of that detect and avoid piece. And getting that onto the general aviation, business aviation aircraft, where you can now see the drones when they're flying as well, will be very important, I think.
Okay, gentlemen, appreciate that one. We've had to do a little bit of interpretation on this one from Rick Newsom. We think we understand what he's asking. Have you trailed aircraft to unmanned aircraft system remote control, which we think means, have you used a tail aircraft to serve in the role of a UAS remote control for line of sight? Or has anybody done this yet?
Well, under Part 107,
in
you're not allowed to do that. So, yeah, I can say that under Part 107, you're not allowed to do that. It may be waiverable. I'd have to look that one up. But so when you're talking about the small scale stuff, I haven't seen that happen. But larger scale stuff, I'm going to defer to my colleagues.
Right. So the twofold piece is it kind of defeats the purpose of bringing an unmanned aircraft to a business if you're already going to fly the manned aircraft with it. You kind of lose a lot of the cost savings and value from that. But the somewhat tongue-in-cheek answer, of course, and I'll bounce back to Romin, was there's a great video of 1958, them doing exactly that.
Right.
Okay.
I think that's a great tickler to watch a video.
Will, this is from Anthony Esposito. Will unmanned aircraft be certified under Part 21.17B or Part 27?
So right now, the big push is very low risk under 2117B. If you watch the Federal Register back in January, February, there was a period for us to make comments on that, and that period is closed. And that's the initial idea, is that it's a special class. Eventually, hopefully there'll be a standard category for unmanned aircraft, much like we have for utility transport, et cetera, that we'll be able to go off of. And then break as you get larger, and we're not dealing with some of the smaller size systems. Part 27 pieces will be used, and you've already seen that as well. I think a lot of the flying taxi work and the eVTOL work is driving us down that line where, a propeller is a propeller is a propeller, a rotor is a rotor is a rotor. We don't need to reinvent that just because there's no crew on board.
I've always wondered about the flying taxi piece. Doesn't that fundamentally violate the idea of an unmanned aircraft?
And the title of our next webinar is?
There we go. Just looking at this question, I've got a question, I guess, on top of it. With small Part 107 operations looking to apply for waivers on line of sight and night operations, do you have any advice on how to get those approved? And I guess, and they're saying specifically for fire operations, my question is if you're a traditional rotor wing operator and you have a proven SMS system in place, would that help in addition to whatever else might be needed for a waiver?
Yes, an SMS system would definitely be helpful, as well as some kind of GOM, FOM, SOPs. They want to see some kind of documentation on how your operation works. But if you're looking at doing this for firefighting or something like emergent in that way, If something you need right now, you can usually get an SGI for that. That special government interest waiver. The difference between the two, the SGI is something you get usually within minutes. That's the whole idea behind it. But it is for that one operation. And when that operation is done, the waiver's done. So having a BB loss waiver enables you to do whatever operations you're going to do under that waiver and under its constraints, but it doesn't expire at the end of the operation.
Jonathan or Romin, anything to add on that?
I was going to say that 97% of all the waivers, the 4,000 plus that have been awarded, have been for night and becomes very easy. Now, adding in the fire adds a different consideration, but if you're just looking for a night and to put that in place, you're there. Second, to build off Greg, with the SGI, if you have an existing waiver for night, but there's some limitations, and then you go apply for an SGI, and really any of the waivers for 107, to be honest, that is looked at as a level of competence, and you may be able to get an additional authorization based on that particular exigent instance. And we've seen that as well, where people have a waiver for controlled airspace and night, and then because of an instance, they were able to get them combined magically together, and now they're flying in Class Bravo at night, and everything's all clean and golden for about 24 hours, and then everything shuts down again. But it is that level of process, and that is growing. And again, they're trying to tie more of that into type certification, so you don't have to get the night waiver, and you don't have to get some of these other things in place.
Okay, I note that we are getting close to our traditional closing time, but we do have a handful of more, well, we do have more questions. Is there anybody, any of you three that need to drop out at all for time today, or can you stay with us?
So I have just about 2 minutes, and then I have to drop out, unfortunately, for another meeting.
Okay, I'll ask you one quick question then. It says with one manufacturer, drone manufacturer, holding most of the small USA market share, and the FAA as well as other government organizations being on the edge of restricting their products. Do you know of any other rotor aircraft that seem up and coming or promising? And that's from Maxwell Donahue.
I was going to say I do, but as HAI pointed out, we don't really promote any particular products in general. But I'm more than happy to answer some of those questions offline. But the domestic manufacturers, there are out there, and there's different things that are growing to meet that particular need now. So.
Okay, well, we hope that they'll be able to come to Heli Expo and see what might show up there too. Jonathan, I do appreciate your time today. Really look forward to working with you in the future on some of these projects.
All right, thank you so much.
Craig, will you be able to stay with us?
I can stay for a bit.
Okay. Let's see. Romin, what is the solution to coordinate UAVs beyond line of sight with manned aircraft in the same space?
You know, I wish it was that simple that I could answer that. I'm not the authority for that, obviously, right? But as I listen to a lot of these questions about, authorities, it's really about mitigating, risk. I mean, what can I say at this point other than we got to stay connected to the FAA. But if you think about, what is it that I'm offering you here today that's a little bit different? We're not talking about flying taxis. We're not talking about, generally operations over people in urban areas. I would envision, based on our launch customers' missions that they're looking to do, you're going to fly in a manned configuration. You're going to fly a good old-fashioned K-Max and get to your work area. And then maybe there's a waiver or special consideration so that you can go and operate, for example, and fight your fire at night. When traditionally, this is a gap, right? I mean, you fight hard all day, you attack all day, and then this thing grows, and so that's sort of what I'm trying to do is paint the picture. We want to do work, right? We want to go to these areas that you just need to keep attacking, keep fighting, not necessarily simply flying in the national airspace and all of those things that will come eventually and that we'll all need to be compliant with. So the best we can do right now is make sure that our systems are reliable, redundant, and that we're aligned with what our authority is thinking in terms of safety. I already heard, you need to think about beyond visual line of sight. we have thought about beyond visual line of sight. So for example, you're going to have GPS-based autonomy. You're going to have beyond visual line of sight command and control, and then you're going to have line of sight command and control. Multiple layers so that you don't, quote unquote, lose control of your UAS. I mean, remember, this is not novel. People have been controlling aircraft from beyond line of sight for a very, very long time. So we just need to be careful that as we integrate some of these proven technologies, that we offer risk mitigation and smart ways of doing business, so that there's an appetite, to open this up so people can do what they need to do and get this increase in capability.
Okay, our next question is for Craig. For SoCal Electric, for SoCal Edison, let's make sure we get your name right. What percentage of power line inspection is completed by UAS as opposed to traditional rotary wing aircraft?
Currently, because our program is still relatively in its early stages for UAS, the vast majority of the transmission inspections are still being done by helicopter. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that at the moment, we're probably at about maybe 40% of the distribution lines are currently being done by UAS, with the remainder by helicopter at the moment. And but we expect both of those numbers to shift towards UAS more and more as time goes on. Part of that you have to understand is the limitations of each aircraft, and so the idea is to bring the right tool to the job that you need for that particular moment. So I consider the helicopter to be more of a strategic tool, where the UAS is more of a tactical tool. And the UAS is very powerful in cases where you have a problem here. Let's show up and get a good look at it without having to climb up the structure and take a look. Whereas if you're just doing a conditional inspection of your entire circuit, if you do that by UAS, you're going to spend twice the money and do it in twice the time as with a helicopter. So that's as we move towards beyond visual line of sight, we'll be able to see some other realizations out of that, but that's probably going to be a little ways away yet.
Okay, this is kind of a long question. It's from Rudy Myers. Is it the same governing body for regulations that oversees heavy-duty drones presented in this webinar, as well as the small professional delivery drones less than 200 pounds? And if so, what is the governing body? And by body, do you mean agency or regulatory authority?
As far as I can tell, it's the FAA all the way around. It's the governing authority. The only kind of, I guess, local jurisdiction I've ever seen applied has more to do with airspace and where you can fly, but not really the method. So the only difference there with anything more than 55 pounds is that you're moving, kind of, as John mentioned earlier, moving more into that Part 91 space, or you're also going into what they call a Section 44807, which is that's primarily what's used for people who are experimenting with things that are going to get outside of that Part 107 space, and you can get a certificate of authorization for that particular type of operation that you're proposing. But and that's actually probably something Romin's more involved with what they're doing with KMAX. But as far as the regulatory bodies, it's still going to be the FAA. As far as unless you're getting into the public use space.
Romin, did you have any thoughts there?
Just a thought here, as you start to delve into this, it's apparent to me that much of the discussion on UAS has really, and integrating UAS has really been focused on the smaller drones, small UAS, and there is a difference. But I am seeing, for example, in the roadmap we just reviewed, I mean, you are seeing this start to get expanded. I think a lot of assumptions are made early on, but again, the UAS is not, there's a lot of novelty in here too. There's a lot of new stuff as well. But we tend to think of ourselves as, again, sort of in the evolutionary phase of rotor wing operations for your typical helicopter, right? Just to move on to the next step here. So.
Well, and we did assume that Rudy was from here in the U.S. We don't know that for certain. We do have, we've mentioned, we do have a number of international viewers as well. Obviously, if you have this question outside of the U.S., please check with your CAA. I'm certain that they're going to be able to answer that question a little bit more directly. This one also seems to be regulatory in nature. Why do some approvals seem to happen so much faster? Is there a magic formula for fast tracking approvals? Do either of you have any tips for that?
The only thing I can say is that the level of complexity for your request is going to have a direct bearing on that. The waiver process, when you're going for a waiver, what you're doing is essentially telling the FAA that you have an alternate means to mitigate whatever risk the regulation that's in place is there to avoid. So if it's what they call a night waiver, what they really call a daylight waiver, and if you've ever noticed, the government calls everything exactly what is not. If you have a daylight waiver, that's relatively easy. I put some lights on and I can fly. Whereas you're going for beyond visual line of sight, there's a whole slew of things that you have to be able to solve for that. And I'll defer to Roman because he probably has solved a lot of those things and what his program is about.
So the only thing I would offer, to me, communication is key. There's a bureaucracy involved for good reason. I mean, it's a hard thing, to ensure safe skies over the entire, continent. But I think the key is if you want to be effective with the bureaucracy, you just have to communicate. You have to find the right people to communicate with and reach out and make sure that your progress is being tracked, appropriately as you go through this process. But it's not a lot, but that's what I would offer. I think that's probably the best I could do for you right now.
And sorry to be the interloper and jumping in. The only other thing I would add on the comment about why does it take so much longer, we're asking for an operational waiver, an operational approval on systems that are not type certified. And a lot of times you're asking operational inspectors to review airworthiness information, and that's sometimes a little out of their wheelhouse, so it takes a lot longer for them to be happy with it. And that's a lot of where that problem comes from, if that makes sense.
I think so, John. I appreciate your staying online. Didn't think you were still there, actually, but I think our final question probably might be one that you might be able to answer. It's from Kevin Dorn. And are there any updates that you're aware of regarding a federal ban on a certain AUS aircraft?
So as far as updates, there's something called the most recent two are the Scott bill and the McSally bill. And if you look at those, they are very highly targeted towards what they call strategic competitors. And I'll use that term instead of picking out any company or manufacturer. That's targeted towards the strategic competitors in those countries and addresses a number of things, not just the aircraft themselves, but some of the ground surveillance aspect and the data off of that. And that is a very fluid thing right now. So if you're really interested in that, because that's more of a trade issue than an FAA issue, those are the two things I would recommend you look at right now.
Okay, well, Romin, Craig, John, gosh, we really appreciate the fact you joined us today. This has been an incredibly interesting topic. I know that I learned a great deal of information on this topic. Now I want to go out and start a rotary wing business and bring unmanned aircraft into it as well. For our viewers, we will have a follow-up questionnaire coming shortly. We do ask that you please take a few minutes to respond. One of the key elements of that is topics that are going to be upcoming, your suggestions. That helps us develop the program for these webinars so that we can find things that are of interest to you, the viewer. Speaking of that, save the date next week, June 11th, this same time, Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Will be HAI at Work webinar using virtual reality to design the future of rotorcraft. And that is going to be presented by Bell. They've got a couple people going to come on and talk with us about how they are using virtual reality to replace the old slide rules, the drafting tables, the blueprints. Everything is digital now, so it's going to make it a really interesting subject. As always, let HAI know if you have any suggestions on anything that HAI is doing. Heli Expo is coming up now. We've got a number of other programs that are underway. We'd love to know what you think we could do better, what we're doing well right now, what we might have missed entirely. The best email address to use for that is president@rotor.org with your challenges, your questions, your compliments. We obviously in the email, it says President. It goes directly to James Viola. He is the one who receives those, and we promise we will respond to those. So now we thank you for your time. As always, we look forward to seeing you next week. Please stay safe and please fly safe.